Hey, thank you guys for being part of my small group tonight, and let me share with you a story out of Genesis, provisions for our journey. I want to start off by asking you a couple of questions here on taking a trip or a journey. Think about your last family vacation. You planned a date, you scheduled your time off from work, and or made sure you didn't have any conflict with your classes. What are some other things that you do when you're getting ready to take a trip?
Pack.
You pack. Is there something you do before you pack?
Go shopping.
Go shopping. um, as you get closer to the vacation, you begin to take the clothes you bought, you pack them, you figure out which vehicle you're going to drive, you know what groceries you want to take or what you want to buy when you get there. I personally am a fan of getting it all when I'm here and taking it with me because I don't like to have to go to the grocery store when I could be at the beach. But my husband, on the other hand, has a different philosophy. What do you think his is?
Just get it there.
Just get it there. Why do we need to travel with groceries across a couple of states when they have grocery stores at the beach for a reason? As the departure day gets closer, the planning turns to action. You actually pack your bags, you pack the car, you get your entertainment loaded up for your trip, you alert the neighbors, you make sure your mail is being taken care of. When you finally get into the car and you pull away out of your driveway, you get on the interstate, you kind of have this sense of accomplishment and a little bit of relief. Like, okay, here we go. We're on our trip. And then some doubt creeps in. You start to think, did I pack appropriately? Did I forget something? Do I have the medicine? Do I have what I need in case of an emergency? Can we afford this trip? What if we spend more money than we said we were going to? So whether you're planning your next vacation or you're trying to figure out what your major in college is going to be, or if you're dating the person that's supposed to be your future spouse, we all are on a journey in this life. Sometimes our next journey arises without warning. We get a new diagnosis. We have an unplanned job change, have an unplanned trip. This was the case with Abraham. Abraham has seen God do the impossible in the past. They've had promises that God has made to Abraham. That's when he promised him Isaac's, when he changed his name from Abram to Abraham. Told him and Sarah that they were going to conceive a child in their old age. They were well beyond, decades beyond childbearing years. And when God made that promise to them, do you remember what Abraham and even Sarah did?
Laughed.
They laughed, that's right. But just as God promised, Sarah conceived a child, and he got here right when they told him, about a year later, that from that promise when he said it was going to happen. So here we are several years later at this point with Isaac as a young boy. Some scholars have him older, some have him around 6 or 8, some have him in his later teen years. So what do you think Abraham thought every time he looked at Isaac? Do you think he thought God keeps his promises, or my God can do miracles? God is faithful. He remembered that his son was a miracle. He might not have been aware of that all the time, but I'm sure part of the time he just enjoyed being Isaac's father. I'm sure Abraham never lost his faith, never forgot that God had kept his promise. After all, the promise was for Isaac, that Abraham's descendants, Isaac's descendants, would be too numerous to count. As the text is going to reveal, Abraham's faith was solid, regardless of how long it had been since God fulfilled the promise by sending Isaac. Abraham was a man of faith and walked with God. His growth from his spiritual journey and encounters with God helped him prepare for this unplanned journey. Well, let's look at Genesis 22, read about Abraham's faith. And it came to pass after these things that God tested Abraham and said to him, Abraham. And Abraham said, Here I am. He said, Take now your son, your only son, whom you love, Isaac, and go to the land of Moriah, and offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains which I will tell you. So Abraham rose early in the morning, saddled his donkey, took 2 of his young men with him, and Isaac his son, and he split wood for the burnt offering. He arose and went to the place of which God had told him. On the third day, Abraham raised his eyes and saw the place from a distance. Abraham said to his young man, "Stay here with the donkey, and I and the lad will go over there, and we will worship and return to you." So God's told him to go. He's called him out of his comfort zone. Will God call us out of our comfort zone? Does God test us? One of the explanations that I like on the testing part from God is what Wiersbe tells us. He explains it this way. Satan tempts us to bring out the worst in us, but God tests us to help bring out the best. James chapter 1, verse 12 through 15 tells us that God doesn't tempt us. The most severe tests do not come from people, but they come from the Lord. And the greatest blessings always accompany them. God never tested Lot in this way. Lot lived in such a low level in Sodom that the world tested him. It's the saint that walks closest to God that God tests, and tests the greatest for his glory. So that's how Wiersbe explains testing versus temptation. But anyway, God called Abraham to leave, take his son, his only son, as a sacrifice. Abraham knew God's voice. He had heard it before. So as soon as God called, he answered. God told him to go to Moriah, sacrifice my son. Child sacrifices were not uncommon in this day. It wasn't a foreign idea. As a matter of fact, it was very common for people to sacrifice or offer their dearest child when a danger threatened the nation. They wanted the pagan gods to have mercy on them when they perceived a threat, and so they would offer a child sacrifice. I'm sure Abraham was aware of that, but never dreamed in a million years that God would ask his only son to be sacrificed. In Genesis 17:2, God promises Abraham's descendants that they would be countless. Abraham was very aware of his age and asked God during that time to let the blessing fall on Ishmael, and God said, "No, Sarah will bear your son, your only son." So Abraham responds, apparently without hesitation. He rises early the next morning, gets prepared for his journey, gets his donkey, his wood. He was acting out of faith and sheer obedience to God. He split wood for the offering, got his companion, saddled his donkey, and they started out on their way. So God called him out of his comfort zone, and he's going. So now when God calls, we need to trust God to provide. Genesis 22, verse 6, will continue the story. So Abraham took the wood for the burnt offering, laid it on Isaac his son, and took in his hand the fire and the knife. So the two of them walked up together. Isaac spoke to his father and said, "Father," and he said, "Here I am, my son." And he said, "Behold the fire and the wood, and where is the lamb for the offering?" Abraham said, "God will provide for himself the lamb for the burnt offering, my son." So the two of them walked together. When they came to the place where God had told him, Abraham built the altar and arranged the wood and bound his son Isaac and laid him on the top of the wood. Abraham stretched out his hand and took the knife to slay his son, but the angel of the Lord called to him from heaven, "Abraham, Abraham." He said, "Here I am." He said, "Do not stretch out your hand against the lad and do nothing to him, for now I know that you fear God, since you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me." Then Abraham raised his eyes, looked, and beheld, there in the thicket was a ram caught by his horns. Abraham went and took the ram and offered him up for a burnt offering in the place of his son. Abraham called the name of the place Jehovah-Jireh, the Lord will provide. As it is said to this day, in the mount of the Lord it will be provided. So Isaac was aware of the journey they were on. He knew that they were going to offer a sacrifice to God. Isaac's carrying the wood, Abraham's carrying the fire. The traveling companions are waiting at the bottom of the mountain so the two of them can go worship alone. And Isaac asks, "Where's the sacrifice?" Abraham shows his faith immediately in the answer, "The Lord will provide the sacrifice." So they journey up the mountain together, build the altar, prepare the wood. He places Isaac on top of the wood. What was going through his mind at this point? Isaac is the promised seed. His descendants are supposed to be too numerous to count. God told Abraham that about this promise, and God had been faithful on every promise up until that point. So God sent Isaac to Abraham and Sarah in their old age, decades past their childbearing years. And here is God requiring Abraham to sacrifice his only son.